Hi everybody, how you guys doing out there in remote land? We're excited to have this Black Men Technology Conference, and we're excited for this panel. My name is Jerome Hardaway. I'm the Executive Director of Vetsu Code, and I'll be your moderator today between these two fine gentlemen who are experts in the tech space in Silicon Valley. Without further ado, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. William, will you please go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'd be glad to. Greetings all. Hope all is well in virtual land, to Jerome's point. Honored to be here today. My name is William Traylor. I'm a Vice President of Global Operations at AT&T. And I'm actually not in the Valley, Jerome. I'm in mid-continent. So I'm in sunny Dallas, Texas. So holding it down for the middle part of the country. But really looking forward to the dialogue today and talking through some of the things that face us as Black men across the industry. We'll talk some about my journey, but most importantly, I think what does the path forward look like for all of us as an industry and for the next generation.
Art Taylor, I'm a Senior Director for PayPal, leading a couple of different things, but most specifically, not only our Arizona region or sites that we have, but also our global financial crimes component that also looks at technology and some of our risk innovation efforts. So, William, it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to connect with you on this conversation, and Jerome as well.
Roger that, thank you. Well, without further ado, let's get right into it. Number one complaint we hear about when it comes to hiring people of color, men of color, is the tech talent pipeline and how it's just lacking. So what recruitment and pipeline solutions that could be effectively used to bring more Black male representation in tech?
William, you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So there's a couple things, and I'll be somewhat brief, but maybe we can unravel or step into a couple of them. But so whenever a company's thinking about hiring diverse talent and really focusing in on Black talent, and I think a lot of companies right now are trying to figure out ways to really be able to do that. One of the things, and I'll speak specifically, obviously, for PayPal, is that we really try to think about how can we do and look in two areas. One, how can we focus in on our internal talent, being able to create technical talent out of individuals in different parts of the organization, but also our pipeline. And so, there are some things we do that are very specific and intentional for Black talent, and that's focusing in on how do we bring in more interns from HBCUs and offer them opportunities for careers and that sort of thing. But you also have to look more broadly across the nation, right? And we know that, past Texas, in Arizona, there are no HBCUs. In California, we don't have any, right? So how do we continue to go after the right type of talent, diverse talent as well? And so I think there's opportunities still to partner with universities throughout the nation, whether they have different groups or student unions that we're able to focus in on, and community groups, right, where we can create that talent pipeline. In addition to being able to do some of those things, it's also about how can we invest in some of those universities. One of the things that we do at PayPal is we offer research projects and opportunities for universities to participate in certain or particular projects or initiatives, right? And we allow for those labs to be able to bring their students in at the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior opportunity to be able to work on projects directly for PayPal, building those relationships and that experience. So I think in thinking about those two different areas, both what you can do internally and what you're able to do externally are so important about building and developing that talent to be able to get the folks that we need to. William, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would add to that. I think HBCUs are undoubtedly bedrock for pipelining Black talent, right? That's a no-brainer. But as you mentioned, when we go further west we go, we run out of HBCUs, right? So the physical presence of recruiting and being on campus takes on a different complexion, essentially west of the Mississippi. And so I think there's a couple of things. One, when we think about tech, we think engineers, right? So my one encouragement to all is, for students, is to think more broadly about broad career spectrum in things like sales, marketing. In the startup tech community, they call it growth or business development, right? But how do you go distribute technology? How do you understand marketplaces? In addition to how you make and produce the technology. I think there's a whole realm of possibility that opens up for Black males or minorities in general when we think about the broad spectrum of technology. And for us as companies, AT&T, I'll speak specifically, we actually just launched a HBCU challenge. And so we're hearing a lot about 5G these days. And so essentially, this is a challenge that will be competed head to head across campuses. There's a prize of $50,000, and the winning team is going to come to Afrotech, virtual Afrotech, obviously, and present their solution. And it's essentially taking the 5G network and unused network capacity and figuring out a solution, whether that's helping with criminal justice or social justice, healthcare, you name the application. But I think it's these kinds of experiential sort of solutions for the firms that are recruiting and the opportunity for those that are looking to be recruited to be able to evidence their depth and their capacity outside of just a normal interview process, right? When we think of normal college recruiting or normal intake and talent acquisition, it's always sort of a serial interview process. You go through 1, 2, 3, 4, sometimes a panel, but I think it's these opportunities to do experiential things in hackathons or in these other settings where you're competing as a case team and getting a chance to meet those that are hiring, both the executives and the HR staff. And so I think that would be the one kernel that I would offer to peers across industry is think experientially and offer experiences to better bridge the talent gap with your talent needs, okay? And then the other thing I would offer up is there is a deep undercurrent of capacity in classical civil rights organizations, right? So think Urban League, think NAACP, think of your black chambers, think of institutions and enterprises like BE, right? And they're in your backyard, right? They have branches and chapters and chambers all over the place. And I think we get calls all the time at a local level of bright individuals that are at maybe a local institution, a local state school that we might not recruit from, right? On the western slopes of Colorado as an example, right? We don't necessarily go to recruit there. It just doesn't fit our scale. But there's a 1 degree of separation through these classical civil rights organizations, right? Inroads is one that comes to mind. We pipeline a lot of talent through Inroads, both as interns each summer and then ultimately as full-time employees. And, there's so much going on in tech and there's so much in the startup space and there's so many new firms. I would just encourage us all to double and triple down on the classical civil rights infrastructure that's already there, because I think in many cases there's capacity that we're missing. And I think when you think about the next generation, those organizations or entities might not be as relevant to them generationally. I would encourage them to double and triple down on those spaces and places as well.
Roger that. To expand on my question, both of you brought up HBCUs and colleges. And while that may be a core component or a component, if you will, from my experience, it's looking as more of a pattern matching clause that we're adopting from our constituents that's 10 to 15 years old. I have several colleagues who are at Facebook, across a range of FANGAM companies who do not have degrees. Famously, the individual that came up with Instagram stories and pushed that team was 18 years old. So what are we doing? What do you think we should do as a community to come and attract that talent that's coming from unconventional paths or may have the capacity but may not go the college route? I myself, I've been in the industry for almost a decade, did not go to college for tech at all. Security forces, straight out Air Force. My degree is in criminal justice. There's nothing techie about what I did prior to getting into tech. So how do we solve that problem without having you have to go to uni and be in an HBCU or have some connection with a program for us to be able to get eyes on you and attract that talent?
Yeah, I think that's still a big area of opportunity. I'll offer that up, right? And not just in Black communities, not for Black males or minorities in general. I think there's still a general bias across big firms that college is a gateway, right? That getting an undergraduate degree is a gateway into industry as a whole, right? Not just tech. And so I think, generally speaking, we're all getting more creative with that, right? Through many of the coding environments and many of the, I'll call it social entrepreneurship platforms. But I think it's still a big ever opportunity. And I think we all just need to challenge each other to be a lot more open-minded about where do we source technical talent. Caveat though, I think, and I've seen many examples where we can get folks in, but they tend to stagnate, right? Invariably, when we start talking about advancing careers, and I think we'll talk more about this here in a little bit, when we talk about advancing careers in those FANG companies you mentioned, right? The Facebooks, the Apples, the Amazons, the Google. To ascend requires leading people, generally speaking, right? And we might get folks in, but then for them to ascend and flourish and prosper, they typically are going to want them to have other experiences or other training. And I think that's sort of the crux of the issue that we get into when we do the trade-off of, I could bypass college and go code. I don't need to go to college. I was mentoring somebody the other day, overseas actually. And he's 21 years old. He works for us. He's actually in school now, getting a degree, but he was a bright young coder. We hired him to go build something. He got done building that thing, and then was like, okay, he poked his head up and was like, well, what do I do now? Right? I want to go manage people. I want to lead a team. I want to manage engineers. And then he gets into a pool where he's competing with others that have degrees, right? So ultimately we're sending him back to school, or he's going back to school and we're paying for it. But ultimately, I think that's kind of the caveat that I would offer up.
Yeah, William, I definitely agree. I think it continues to be a challenge. And I think one of the things, though, that I'm both optimistic about, but there are areas that we've seen great success in, is when we challenge ourselves to look. And again, this kind of goes back to the internal piece for a lot of companies. And so my advice will be, get into the companies that you see a future in and that you'd like to grow within, even if you're getting in a different area. And Jerome, I don't know if this is your specific story, but it's similar to my career story where, I looked for a company that I wanted to ascend or grow within because of what they believed in, their mission matched mine, et cetera. And then I was able to really kind of build that, from my own development, my own growth within these companies. And so I think it's important for us to realize that although, yes, you're right, companies should not be short-sighted and only look to specific universities or folks with specific degrees. We also have to we have to meet, companies someplace, right? And they're going to look for and go to the places where they think they're going to have the greatest rate of opportunity or return on finding talent. And so at times you'll have to get in different roles. You have to grow kind of from that perspective. But I also think that companies are coming around and specifically looking at other areas, other opportunities, because it is competitive. It's competitive on these universities, on these campuses as well. And so I think what's important to know, and William mentioned Inroads, and there's a lot of other great groups out there, General Assembly. We're partnering and doing some work with a lot of different groups now, starting as early as, elementary school. We're trying to be able to develop folks and get them that kind of mindset, whether or not they go and get that formal training later on or not, it still adds value. And so I think what's important to know is, there's an opportunity for people to start and get in different ways and places. That does not mean that your path can only lead to one direction, whether it's tech or not. And it's also really important just to underscore William's point around leadership. If you're going to ascend, it's going to involve a level of leadership and planning and thoughtfulness and that sort of thing. So I think that's the piece that I would offer or advise, is that getting in and kind of the skills and the areas you have at the moment, and then also still thinking about where you might find that untapped talent.
Yeah, great.
All right, I say Roger that because I'm military. And to go on that story, I got out the military and learned SQL and never looked back, and fell in love with tech. And I was just, I'm here. Can't kick me out.
That's right.
So next question.
Jerome, I will thank you for your service, first of all.
Yes, thank you for your service.
But two, I would tell you some of my best managers have military backgrounds. I think there's a duty and a service and a spirit of leadership that I think is ingrained in those that go through military service that is unrivaled.
Thank you. I volunteered, so it's always weird when civilians like thank me because it was a thing. But it was one of those things in the military where we teach leadership. Everyone's a leader
Hmm.
regardless of level. So that's
Mhm.
one of those things that you just touched that is actually true, and we appreciate as a leader that you see that. But all right, let's keep the conversation flowing. Now, I'm not supposed to be starved here. You guys are. So let's talk about this. What are the challenges that you see facing Black men once they begin to pursue careers in tech? Do you have any advice or insight that people might be interested in?
I do. I do. As I'm sure Art has plenty. Um, there's it's a cultural nuance that I would offer. We as a Black community generally culturally don't like to ask for help. Right? It's a sign of weakness. So I think we'll touch on that. But then two, it's when you look at majority communities or you study others' trajectories, right? You'll start to uncover networks of power and influence, right? So I like to think of it as you need to have people that are there to pull you up, right? People that are there to offer a hand of assistance, sponsors, mentors, whatever you want to label them. Nobody who achieves any measure of success does it on their own, I think, unequivocally. And other communities are more comfortable asking for help. I mean, obviously, you have to give and make deposits and do your part, and shoot lots of baskets and make lots of points and be a performer. But generally speaking, I think we have to be more accustomed and more comfortable with humility and asking for help. Right? It is tough, especially as a Black person or as a Black male, being the only. Right? And when we start talking about tech or just industry in general, many a times you're going to be the only person in the room that looks like you. Sometimes there might be two, right? Unless you're in a place like Atlanta, right? But most places, it's just going to be you, right? And I think there's a common bond and understanding that we have to stick together a lot more, but we also have to be a lot more comfortable asking for help and building personal boards of directors that don't look like us, right? Because in many cases, it's people that don't look like you that are going to be pulling you up. I like to think of it as having supporters and sponsors that are three levels above you, regardless of whether it's in the entrepreneurial sphere or the corporate sphere or the community sphere. There are those who have traveled before you and achieved some measure of success greater than you that are going to look after you or look out for you when you're not in the room. I think that's a big part of the success pattern that we have to teach the next generation and just generally get more comfortable with asking for help. It's a skill that we really need to cultivate.
Yeah, William, I mean, those points are you've dropped some gems. And so I just want to underline a couple things. One, the personal board of directors, right? And so you mentioned it. I think that's been one of the most powerful things that I've seen for folks is when they really get a strong group of people around them. And again, it doesn't have to be a large group, but it's a group of people around you that's able to help challenge, but also help to guide and navigate. I think one of the hardest parts, especially when people start at a new company, is understanding how do you navigate the culture of that company, not just how do I come in and do a good job. Well, how do you define what that is? It's not what's in the job description. That's not going to
Yeah.
advance you, right? So you have to understand what's that next level, what's that next step. So I think it's really important for people to understand that component or that piece. I also think it's critical to think about. You talked about being humble or humbling yourself a little bit and being willing to ask for help. In addition to being willing to ask for help, you have to be willing to state or articulate what are your goals, right? So be able to really articulate those and communicate. What are you looking for? Is it just advancement? Is it the type of role? Be able to describe what you're looking to achieve or do.
Yeah.
You mentioned it with the individual you're mentoring. He wants to lead a group of engineers. So it's a leadership component. So focus in on that. Be specific, not I want to get to the next level. Well, what does that mean really? That makes it hard or challenging for folks to maybe support in the way they need to. So I think
Yeah.
those two things are really important, being able to articulate what you want to do, how you want to get there, and specifically what does that look like for you.
Yeah, totally agree.
That's yes, gonna say it better yourself. I'm lucky in my career that I actually have an actual board of directors that I have to answer to. So They help me. They help me get higher faster because you have people that yell at you all the time. It's like my wife plus 12 other people. It's awesome.
Whatever we need, whatever you need.
Yeah, she's gonna see this. She's gonna get mad. So yeah, so let's talk about reaching the next level. We touched lightly on it, but what do you think must happen for the tech industry for people that look like us to get to the next level, to reach that C-suite level, that executive level, that founder level? Recently, Google, they just had the Black Founders Fund, and they dropped about $2.5 million across the country to Black founders. How do we get to that next level to where there's more of us and more of that?
Yeah, I think maybe I'll touch on this. And again, I'm not there. William will be able to add a lot more than I can, but I think for the things that I've seen and where and how I've seen people ascend, I think what's really important is for us to understand the broader scope of the business. We have to understand it at a much more macro and holistic level. I think we have to understand the various components that are there for it. And there are, specificity when it comes to that C level. But we have to understand that and really understand those components or aspects of the business. But I think in addition to that, I think it has to do with demonstration of what's that additional value that we bring. How are we able to think about, and this gets to reminding people and reminding leaders around the power of diversity. There were several and strong reminders throughout 2020 about the power of diversity, right? As you think about resiliency that people needed to be able to be remote, be virtual, as you thought about people as we worked through the traumatic and really amplified social issues that we were dealing with as a country, there were a lot of companies that were looking and wishing they had been more intentional about their level of diversity, or wishing that they had particular leaders in certain spots. So I think it's really important for us to constantly demonstrate, regardless of the level that we're at, that this is the power of diversity. It's the power of having Black people in leadership positions and positions to be able to help guide companies through those levels of challenges. I personally, helped and worked along with our CEO in thinking about how are we going to stand up and meet the obligation and responsibility as a company, as our country was going through what we were going through, knowing we had a moment that we needed to do something. We're able to look into a diverse company and do that. If you're not there and you don't have that, you're in a whole different situation. We saw those companies that really struggled through that and being able to get their employees where they needed to be, being able to show up the way they needed to or wanted to in that moment and the impact of that. So I think right now is a good opportunity to remind and reflect on why it's so important to have a diverse leadership team, especially at that upper level of your companies.
Yeah, I would totally agree, hands down. I'll give you 3 added vectors. Okay, I think you asked about founders and entrepreneurial sphere. I'll touch there, but I'll talk some about corporate, but then also about personal. Right? What is it that we can be doing? Because I think at the end of the day, we all need to be leading by example and encouraging others to do the same, whatever part of the industry or tech space we're in. And so I think entrepreneurially, there's this notion that capital is king at the end of the day, right? You talked about Google's fund that they created. I think there's when you look at submarkets like Atlanta or even Huntsville, Charlotte, Raleigh-Durham, there are places other than the coast where there's a burgeoning sort of undercurrent of capital that's beginning to bubble up, right? There's a good brother named Paul Judge down in Atlanta. He is a titan in the tech space and helping to foster that Georgia Tech community and be able to assemble capital. Down in Houston, there's a couple of funds that I know that were created in the last year. Urban Capital Network, which really, I think their aim is quite simply to democratize tech funding. And so they basically piggyback with venture capitalists that are already investing. And so they give folks, regular folks like those of us here, access into what VCs would normally only have access to. And they work specifically with diverse minority founders as well. And so I think it's getting creative and thinking more broadly about how to assemble capital. And you mentioned your wife earlier and your board of directors. I don't know how you're going to recover from that one if she sees this, but it's a good analogy because I look at it like dating, right? You when you're raising capital, you have to do a lot of dating before you get married, right? You don't simply go when you need the capital. You have to go introduce yourself. You have to prospect. You have to curate relationships with those that are in the funding communities before you need the funds. I think that's a big piece that's missing is we generally come up with a business plan or come up with some inventive technology and we go raise money, right? You need money, but you also need a lot of relationships to be able to go place your technology and to go get customers and to go further the growth of the firm, not just assemble capital. So entrepreneurial, bucket one. Corporate. I think this recurring theme of humility. I had a great sponsor of mine that actually retired from AT&T recently. He's the CEO now of a smaller tech company. He spent 30 years here. And I remember about 10 years ago, we had a conversation one day and he says, "What happens when you get your dream car?" And I was like, "What? I don't, mentors always come up with these sage wisdom things, right? When you're young, you don't understand them." And I said, I don't know. I don't have a dream car yet. What does that mean, right? He said, "What's your dream car?" And I said, at the time it was a Rover, right? He's like, "So what happens? You're going to get a Rover one day. What happens when you get the Rover? Then what?" Right? And so I think this notional value of success or achievement, I think, is a moving target because as you achieve, you want more, right? High achievers are high achievers by nature because they drive to achieve. And so I think it's aligning yourself with others that have achieved more than you because they can sort of clear the pathway, right? They've tilled the field and you can sort of see what the direction is. So I would offer that. It's this recurring theme of humility, aligning yourself with coaches, with mentors, with sponsors, with those that have experienced greater success than you, because there's a pattern there. And when you look at successful people, whether that's entrepreneurial or in the corporate sphere, or even in the civic sectors, there's a pattern that can be recognized. There's a pattern that can be learned and shared. And then the third piece I would offer in the corporate sphere specifically is, I think at the end of the day, performance wins. No matter what domain you're in. We just came out of the NBA Finals, so I'll use a basketball analogy. At the end of the day, no matter what the function is, it's about shooting baskets, right? Getting the ball in the basket and getting points on the board. Right? You have to produce. Producers get noticed, right? People want those that are going to help win. And so I think it's continually focusing on being a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all, a learn-it-all, to refine and perfect your craft to help you become a better producer. I think that notional value of humility and being a solid producer is a big part of the code for us all as we go forward.
That's perfect. Something you said about what happens with your dream car, that really resonated with me because I have a mentor and he says, you're not really competing for yourself. You're competing against the person that you're going to be 10 years from now. That way, when you get there, you're going to be competing from that person 10 years from now. So you'll never catch up to them. So it's something you have always go towards. So we're getting ready. A final question before we actually start focusing on that. Let's get into that whole mentorship space. How do you think is the best way for a person, a Black person of color, not only discover mentors, but ensure that they are creating or building the performance that is required to, have someone come on as a mentor? I believe personally that mentorship is a two-way street. You have to have value as a mentee or as a protege. So that way the person that is doing the mentorship, they're willing, they're willing to invest this time and this education freely to you because they see the potential in you. I was wanting to know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll maybe start, and I think you're right on that mentorship does need to be a two-way street. I think one of the things though that sometimes we miss out on is that mentorship does not need to be a formal established relationship between two people. Mentorship can be broad, it can be informal, and quite frankly, it should be a learned experience that can be done vicariously, right? So watching others really achieve, watching others really kind of put in the work, go to the next level, that sort of thing. I mean, if we stick to, I don't want to constantly do the sports analogy, but if we stick to that, one of the greatest things people talk about, for those athletes that we know, like if we think about LeBron, one of the greatest things he talks about is not just his leadership from a verbal standpoint or mentoring and that sort of thing, but he's showing people how to work. But those people that really pick up on that are the people that are able to be in his area while this person's working. Take the opportunity just to be in the room and watch somebody else do work. So some advice I would give, not from establishing a mentor, but this is something I've done that's helped me in my career, is I have identified leaders and I've said, I might go and say, William, is there any meetings that you think I can tag along with you in and I can just watch you work, right? I can watch you conduct. I can watch you lead the session. I can watch how others show up, how you demand for them to show up. That is such an amazing mentoring and a learning experience. But again, being able to do that, William didn't have to do anything different, right? So, but we're able to do those or find ways to make it easy for people to teach us, to mentor us, and guide us on that end.
Yeah.
Sponsorship separately, that's something you need to ask for. That's something you need to say, hey, think about me, and how can I be there to make sure that when you sponsor me, that it's something that you feel comfortable and strong about. But on the mentor side, there's a lot of ways to do it. Don't confine yourself with looking for a person to say, how can I tag myself to you for you to be my mentor? There's a lot of ways to learn it.
Yeah, it's a black man's conference, so I think we're okay with the sports analogies.
We're okay.
They're safe. They're safe here. I remember years ago I moved down to Atlanta for a few years, and everybody in the South loves football, and I felt like I was in heaven because I could use football analogies everywhere, and men and women would relate. But I would say be of service. I think for me, that's been one of the greatest gateways to mentors, sponsors, and supporters, right? And what do I mean by that? I think the purest form of leadership that we all get to experience, we all get to produce and observe, is whereby people are volunteering, they're not conscripted, they're not being paid for their labor, right? So take the civic sector across the board, right? What you'll find is successful people have learned to breed other successful people, and successful people, part of their success is gratitude and giving back. And so they're typically going to have pretty deep engagement in the civic sort of sector just broadly. And there's a variance in talent and skill and resources when you get into the nonprofit space, right? And leaders work inside of a certain domain. They're used to having a certain amount of resources available to them. They go into nonprofit, those same things don't exist. So there's always a need for talent, right? You could relate, Jerome, right? And so I have found in my experiences, both inside of AT&T and outside and other sort of entrepreneurial endeavors, that being of service to those that are successful naturally draws them to want to help you, right? So it's kind of this virtuous cycle. I'll give you a simple story. Years ago, I decided, I was living in Houston, and, as most of our cities across the country, there's a bunch of regentrification happening, right? So I'm looking around like, I want to build townhouses too, right? I had no idea how I was going to do this. And so, I said, okay, well, where do I start? So let me find someone who's doing it already, right? They can at least tell me what not to do. And so when I found a good mentor, and then I realized I needed capital, right? So I needed some of my own capital, but I needed bank capital. And so I had been serving on the board of 100 Black Men at the time. And naturally, I asked one of the older brothers, I said, hey, I need to go raise some money. Where do you think I should go, right? Or give me some advice. And he was a CPA. And he said, call this guy, and I'll set something up for you. The three of us can maybe go to lunch. So we go to lunch. He says, hey, meet William. William, meet so-and-so. so-and-so, I need you to help William go get a line of credit. Fast forward 2 months later, I had $1 million line of credit at 29 years old to go build townhouses. Right? I had never done it before, but it was relational equity, and relational currency that was transferred. And the only way I earned access to it was because I had committed myself to years of service prior to then asking for help. Right? And so I have always found that being of service in its purest form opens the greatest amount of gateways to other supporters or other support when you need it.
Roger that. Well, for you guys at home in virtual land, it was an amazing pleasure for us to be able to talk to you and have these two gentlemen be able to like share ideals and strategies, just having a honest conversation that we hope can help you reach your next level and the goals that you have for yourself. Until next conference, we'll be here for the Q&A. Until next time, hope to see you in the real world someday.